This is, as I told you before when we were setting this up, this is an enormous thrill for me to talk to the man who created one of my, if not my favorite TV show is a great thrill. And the other day, getting to hold your handwritten notes, actually your handwritten script for the pilot was extraordinary because I have lived with Miami Vice for 40 years as a profound part of my life. My wife, having grown up in Miami and being there while the show was being filmed, is a significant part of her life. But to hold that document was extraordinary because it takes me back to a time when Miami Vice didn't exist outside of your head, your pen, and your paper. And I've wondered for you, as you think about it now, as we approach this auction, what that stack of papers means to you now.
Well, I have some understandably bittersweet feelings about this manuscript that has been so important to me and a really meaningful part of my professional life. As I said, I have some bittersweet feelings about it leaving my possessions, but also I feel really good that someone else who's possibly and hopefully a big Miami Vice fan will have it for themselves.
Right.
The everything I've written in my professional writing career has been on paper. I'm very old school in that regard. I just like the feel of it. I really don't think up story and dialogue and characters and plot faster than I can write with a ballpoint pen. I don't flatter myself in that regard. And so I kind of like having just a legal pad there without any electricity buzzing around, without the keyboard, all those things. I know it sounds somewhat Amish for me to work like that, but I really like it. And then, and I've been dutifully and vigilantly saving this manuscript for all these years, just because it's so important to me. And I thought that, maybe sometime in the future, it'll be important to somebody else as well. So to answer your question, yeah, it means a lot to me. And I like the fact that the manuscript really shows in many ways the artistic, hopefully artistic, and the aesthetic process in motion, where I cross out certain words, I bracket things, I've got things written in the margins, I add certain things, I add stage directions. So hopefully it's a vibrant and entertaining and informative and interactive, if you will, read for whoever has it in their hands.
Well, it's interesting. So I spent 30 years in print journalism before I came here about 5 years ago. And, to me, manuscripts often meant, something that had been written hundreds of years ago. Here's a handwritten manuscript by, Walt Whitman or many of the things Heritage offers. It's rare that I actually see something handwritten contemporary, something handwritten that was meaningful to me, something handwritten that led to something that became an extraordinary and influential phenomenon in many ways. So as I hold that, and I think that's why it was so meaningful to me, was because this is really the first thing that you touched that became the thing that touched so many. I think that's perhaps what was most meaningful and impactful about that document to me.
I appreciate hearing that, and I love the fact that I really love the fact that Heritage Auctions is comprised of people who appreciate these things, and not just as an auction house, not just as collectors, but also as people that appreciate and value literature and popular entertainment. So I'm thrilled to be going through this process with you guys.
So let's talk about the document. Let's talk about the manuscript, and let's talk about what led up to it and what followed. Because I'm curious at what point, because obviously you had been, and I assume you had been handwriting manuscripts and screenplays and scripts for Hill Street Blues. So this, as you say, was the way you were working. And as you're beginning to think about Gold Coast or Dade County or the other iterations that it had previously in terms of the name you were thinking of, and as you go make your visits, and as you do your research, and as you read stories about the impact that Miami is having on unofficial revenue to the economy and so forth, I'm just sort of curious, at what point did you sit down with that legal pad and say, I now know what I'm going to write about? Because there's an enormous backstory that goes into all of this. And I'm just sort of curious, when did you know you were ready to write Miami Vice?
I like that question because it shows some understanding of the writing process. And writing for me, and I think for a lot of people, it's a very intimidating process. I've read some great novels. I've read some great literature. I know what really good writing is, and I've read The Great Gatsby, and countless other terrific works of literature. So the bar has been set ridiculously high. TV, we're just pop cultural entertainment, but it doesn't matter. You could be writing a detergent commercial, and if you know and appreciate really good writing, it's intimidating to write anything. Mm-hmm. So I bring that up by way of saying that oftentimes and specifically I don't develop the confidence to actually start writing the screenplay until I've mapped things out pretty well. Maps things out in enough detail and with enough focus and clarity that I feel confident I can start writing. For instance, and it's a whole process. For instance, with my creation of Miami Vice, I started with, I happened to come across just by serendipity, an article in the Wall Street Journal. This was probably around 1982, if I had to guess. And I was working as a good soldier on Hill Street Blues at the time, as a writer-producer, locked in an office, cranking out scripts. We were doing 22 episodes a season, believe it or not, back then. It's not like streaming is nowadays. They'll do 6 or 8 or 10 a season.
You guys had to do a lot of work back then.
It was backbreaking. It's not like I'm sure what you endured in journalism, because you guys are really working under some tight deadlines.
But fewer people were going to see it than saw episodes of Hill Street Blues and later Miami Vice. So
what's that?
Fewer people were going to read what we wrote as opposed to see what you wrote. So,
well, you know what? Suffice it to say, there's pressure and all those areas.
Right.
And at any rate, I was taking a 20-minute lunch break. I just grabbed some newspaper that was in the reception area. It happened to be a Wall Street Journal. I didn't read the Wall Street Journal back then because I just wrongly assumed it was entirely financial news. But back then, Wall Street Journal had one column typically on the front page that was about matters other than strictly financial matters. And this particular article was about Dade County, Florida. Now, this was not long after that Dadeland Mall massacre.
Right.
It was the first time that it was the first time in recent history that something like that, such a brazen crime had been committed in broad daylight. Automatic machine guns, right in a mall, the Dadeland Mall. That really that put Dade County and Miami on the map in terms of crime for a lot of newspapers and magazines. And I saw this article in the Wall Street Journal, as I was saying, and I read through it, and it was about the criminal landscape of Dade County, and the one sentence jumped out at me, and it simply stated that 20% of the unreported income in the United States heralded from Dade County, Florida. And I immediately noted that with surprise. And
Well, the other part of that piece was right. It was 20% of the unaccounted for revenue, but Dade County only had 1% of the nation's population.
1/2 of 1%.
1/2 of 1%, right?
And that was the very next thing I did after I read that sentence. I looked up what the population of Dade County was. 1/2 of 1% of the population in this country is therefore responsible for 20% of the unreported income. What's unreported income? It's all the money that the criminals don't want the feds to see, from drug trafficking, from prostitution, from gambling, from all sorts of illegal enterprises. So once again, 1/2 of 1% of the population of the country was responsible for 20% of the unreported or criminal money. That's statistically a 40-to-1 disparity. And I thought, holy cow, there's 40 times more action going on in terms of criminal enterprise in Dade County, Florida, than the country as a whole. Now, if you're a television writer and you've got to, crank out, if you're lucky enough to get a go-ahead on a series and a renewal, you got to, if you've got to crank out 22 episodes a season, you're not going to be necessarily doing it about maybe a lawyer doing corporate litigation. You could do a good series on that. You're not going to be doing it about an accounting office because you might run out of stories, but so you're looking for a sphere in which there's a lot of activity. That's why there's a lot of law enforcement related shows and hospital shows, there's a lot of action. So I thought this county has got 40 times the criminal activity. And I said, wow, that's, I've got to look into that. I've got to do a little bit of homework on South Florida. Then the second thing that there were 3 salient facts that I put together that coalesced in my mind and encouraged me to do this show. That was that statistic I just cited. The second was the fairly recently enacted at that time federal law of asset forfeiture,
Right.
in which the feds, if somebody was convicted of a federal crime, whether it was drug running, gambling, anything like that, a federal crime, the feds could come in, FBI or ATF, whatever, could come in and confiscate all their stuff, their Rolex watches, their, Brickell condominium, or their estate, or their cigarette boats, their Ferrari, their Lamborghini, their wardrobe, their Versace, their Armani. And then they would hand that stuff over to the very impoverished local cops. So the ones that were working undercover would have the wardrobe and the toys and the accessories to realistically play the role of a big-time drug dealer or gambler. And so that was the second thing. And then the third fact, if you will, or reality, was simply MTV. Wanted to do that in that sphere and set it all to music in a way where in a dialectical way in which the story would comment on the music and the music would comment on the story. And so that was it. Then I thought, okay, that's some pretty cool stuff. Now, who will be our tour guides in this particular culture that's unfamiliar to most of the American viewing audience or the worldwide viewing audience? And so I thought, well, we need protagonists that will serve as good tour guides to take us through this labyrinth of criminal landscape. And so I came up with Sonny Crockett. I wanted to have a local guy that knew the topography and that the audience hopefully could relate to. He's playing a drug runner. He's playing a criminal for most of his on-screen life, for most of his professional work. And so I wanted somebody that the audience could relate to and that the audience hopefully would like. And then I wanted to have another protagonist that, so he could have conversations with them that would help educate the audience, or that would help clue the audience into what they're thinking, what's going on. If he's just there by himself, it doesn't, or silence doesn't work that well, or he's talking to himself. So I thought, well, I want to get, as they say, nothing kills a conversation like agreement, right? So I wanted to have a protagonist that was different than him and had different outlook on life. And from a different world. So I came up with Ricardo Tubbs, who was from New York. So you got New York and you got Florida, got a white, some people would say like a white cracker from South Florida.
He was a football star.
Yeah, he was a good old boy.
Yeah.
And so you've got him, and then you've got like a slick, Hugo Boss wearing half black, half Latin, Puerto Rican guy or Dominican, from New York. So I put those together. I said, okay, now I got something going on. Now who's their antagonist? Let's have this elusive Colombian guy, Calderon, and then we got to have some surprises in there. So that's the thing. So I outline everything, pretty thoroughly before I can build up the confidence and, if you will, the courage to start writing. When I got to that point, then I wrote this manuscript. This is the first. This is the first ink that I put to paper for the Miami Vice, for the screenplay for the 2-hour Miami Vice pilot.
So initially, I have a couple of questions, one of which, and by the way, to this day, Rico Tubbs is the reason that I always pronounce New York, because I can't ever hear the words New York without hearing Philip Michael Thomas say New York. But that said, what I'm fascinated by is this manuscript the version you wrote for the pilot, or when you wrote this manuscript, was it still potentially going to be the film? Because obviously that was where you had the initial deal, but Scarface sort of sidelined the film version of Miami Vice to where it became the pilot after your 20-minute pitch led to the show.
Yeah, this was teleplay, if you will.
Right.
It's not a teleplay of the movie. The movie, the idea or the pitch I had for the movie was the idea of doing it as a movie was scotched.
Right.
Was taken off the desk within 20 minutes of me first pitching it as a film. They said, love it, love it, love it, but we already have a film in post-production. It was in post-production at that time. De Palma had already shot it. We already have the guys at Universal in the film department told me, no, we already have, we love your idea. It's hot. It's really exciting. But we already have a movie that takes place in South Florida that we've already shot, and it's in post-production. And then word got to the TV department right away, hey, there's this exciting idea that Yerkovich has, Anthony Yerkovich has for this. And then the television department said, hey, would you consider doing this as a TV series, right? I was under contract at Universal at that time, so I appreciated their confidence in me. So I said, sure, yeah, I'll go over to NBC and pitch it. So I pitched it, and they said, I just had those ideas that I explicated to you about the two cops and the
right.
chase and stuff like that. I hadn't written anything to paper. I wasn't going to do that unless I had pitched and sold the series. You know, I wasn't going to bust my ass on writing a 2-hour pilot if I didn't have the imprimatur from Universal and from NBC. So went over to NBC, and as I recall, it was a pretty quick pitch. It was 15 or 20 minutes. And I just told them, oh, it's two cops, South Florida, they're chasing this guy. Boom, we've got this cityscape and topography of Miami and Miami Beach, and we've got the music, and I just ran the broad strokes
right.
of it.
So how long?
A 15-minute pitch. They said, we love it. We're in. Then I started writing. Then I started outlining it in detail. And then within 3 or 4 weeks, started writing this manuscript.
So I believe you told my dear old friend Matt Seitz for Vulture in the piece that he did on the 40th anniversary in September of the pilot, that, and I'm trying to figure out, where does the boat ride into Miami? Because you took a boat ride into Miami on a cigarette boat that had been used to smuggle marijuana, and you saw the Miami that you wanted to capture for Miami Vice. Was that before the writing of the pilot, or was that as the show?
That was before the writing of the pilot. That was probably if I had to recall, that was probably 1.5 to 2 years before. And I didn't look at Miami Beach as we were coming in and thought, oh, I've got to write a TV series about this. I just remembered it. And then when I saw that article in Wall Street Journal and I started putting the story together, I recalled vividly that image of Miami that I had captured coming in on the cigarette boat. Actually, it wasn't a cigarette boat, it was a sailboat.
Okay.
And it was I knew some guys from skiing in Aspen, Colorado, that had a side light and marijuana smuggling on pretty big quantities. And at any rate, after I decided, I want to do a story about what turned out to be Miami Vice, I recalled that image and I used it in the writing, and then also after and in the production and the filming, in the talks about the look of the show and stuff like that.
Well, that's so, because what I love about this document is that it is so fully formed. I mean, it's not a rough draft. You don't read it and go, yeah, I can see where Miami Vice comes from. It's fully formed on the page in the written hand. And for those of us who have watched every episode multiple times, you see it in your head. But obviously, because you know what's to come, you know how the show formed, you know how it looked. For those of us who spent years reading about it, critical essays, when David Chase would talk about Miami Vice was the first television show in history that cared about how it looked. So when you have this document in your hand, and I want to go back to that 40 years ago, because I sort of wonder, how amazed were you by the fact that you could get these handwritten words and stage directions on a legal notepad to so accurately and beautifully translate to the screen? Obviously, you're doing this in collaboration with Michael Mann. You're doing it in collaboration with the production team, with the casting directors, with the costumers, but it's all right there.
It is to a certain extent, and wonderfully, if you like working with a team, wonderfully so. It's not all there. So you have, on your team, you got these terrifically talented people, like Michael Mann, like Thomas Carter, the director. I can't say enough about Don Johnson. Their question arises: what would the show have been without Don Johnson? And with Philip Michael Thomas,
Don Johnson, who you guys had to fight for because he'd already been in several pilots, including 3 for NBC, and they're like, this guy's the kiss of death. And obviously, he was the right guy, if not the only guy.
Well, you said that we had to fight for. I was the only, as a matter of fact, to be accurate, I was the only one that was fighting for him, with the backing of my good friends at Universal Television. That'd be Bob Harris and Kerry McCluggage. Because I told them, I said, this is the guy that I want. This is Crockett. And when NBC, after I turned in my first draft, and I told, and NBC asked me, so who are you thinking about for the lead for Sonny Crockett? And I said, well, Don Johnson. They said, so these are the suits at NBC, and they reacted, with negative surprise. And they said, are you kidding? I said, no. And they said, Don Johnson? I said, yeah. And they said, he's a 6-time loser. I said, what exactly do you mean by that? I don't like it when guys on the sidelines that are not on the field, like actors and writers and directors, are, being what I think unfairly critical of the players that are on the field, right? And so he said he's a 6-time loser. I said, well, what exactly do you mean by that? He said, he's done 6 pilots for us here at NBC, and every one of them has gone south. And I said, well, I got nothing better to do this weekend. Why don't you messenger me those 6 failed pilot scripts, and I'll let you know if it was the actor's fault. And so that quieted them considerably. And I just stuck to my guns. I said, this is the guy that it's going to be.
Right.
And I had based that just on, I had run into Don at about a year before that. I'd run into him at, there was some rock and roll Chinese restaurant just off the Sunset Strip. And so I first saw him there, and I thought, this guy's like, in the Hollywood landscape, pretty much a nobody, but he's got star quality. He's got that it factor. So I remembered that. And by the way, getting back to the script, and you had remarked that that it's noteworthy and really cool that it is what was on the screen was pretty much what was in my first draft handwritten manuscript of the first draft. That's true, but with some exceptions. When I first turned that in, for instance, it in typed form, it came to probably like about 80 pages. It was originally, we were thinking, maybe doing a 1 hour pilot. But I got into a groove writing, and I came up with, it was like 80 or 88 pages like that. And my colleagues at Universal said, well, it's too long for a 1 hour. I said, well, I don't know what I'm going to cut. And they said, no, we don't cut anything. We love every page of it. And I said, so what do we do? He said, let's do it as a 2 hour. All you got to do is add like about, all you got to do. They said, you'll have to add like about 15 to 20 pages. So I said, okay, let me figure out how to do this without capsizing the vessel, right?
Right.
And so then I came up with the prologue that takes place in New York. Who's Ricardo Tubbs? Why is Ricardo Tubbs on this mission? That's why I got the thing that, takes place in a rough neighborhood in New York and goes into the nightclub.
Right.
And then I added some other things. So I was able to add, about 15 to 20 pages like that. So the cool thing that I find as a writer about this manuscript is it's a wonderfully so work in progress. And whoever reads through it can see that there's also scenes in there that aren't in the 2 hour pilot because we had to cut them for reasons of economy or for production, practicality, or for a number of reasons. So it's really cool. You get to you get to sort of enter the realm of the filmmaking and kind of see from the inside what's going on.
No, absolutely. But I guess it's funny when I say it's fully formed because it's when I read it, and having had the thrill of having and the opportunity, honor, and pleasure of reading it, it's that it is recognizably there, and I guess that's what I mean.
What you said was, Robert, don't get me wrong. What you said was 100% accurate and spot on. Because what you were conveying is that it captures the gestalt of the piece. It captures the feeling and the ambiance and the characters and the plot and the topography and the cityscape and all the action. I just wanted, whoever sees this to know that there's also some extra stuff in there, and there's some, from a writer's perspective, there's some interesting elements that have to do with a work in progress.
We have a couple minutes here, and I've after 40 years of living with the show and thinking about it, I could keep you for 10 hours, but that would be wisely unfair to you and anyone watching this.
Well, we'll do that at the Buffalo Club in Santa Monica
That'd be great.
with some
With
good
candy.
whiskey or whatever we're having.
That'd be great. What I wanted to ask you though was, obviously, when it starts to take shape, were you surprised by, because you've lived with Miami Vice and the idea of it for a couple of years before you sit down and write it, and certainly before it becomes a team, before it becomes a cast, before it becomes a production, and before it becomes a vision, before it becomes a soundtrack. There's no Jan Hammer, there's no Phil Collins, there's no Michael Mann, there's none of that when you sit down to write it. So when you saw the pilot for the first time, as we go back to this manuscript, which is 80% there, I wondered what your reaction to it was the first time.
Well, I had been, and by the way, I think it's worth noting that after I wrote this handwritten manuscript, that would turn out to be about 80 typewritten pages.
Right.
After that, and before anybody else came on the show, before Michael Mann came on the show, or Thomas Carter, or anybody, I also then subsequently wrote about 2 or 3 more drafts on my own before anybody else came on. So it was a process. But to answer your question, I was not entirely, I had been involved in the whole production process.
No, I mean, you're watching them filming, you know what music is coming,
I'm going to the dailies,
the repainting,
I'm involved in every element of
the
it.
costume, the pastel, how it's going to look. But at the same time,
I'm approving all that stuff, but that's I appreciate your question, because all that notwithstanding, my daily and intimate involvement with the whole production process, whether it has to do with wardrobe or locations or music, anything like that, all that notwithstanding, and going to dailies, all that notwithstanding, when there was a certain point when it really started coming together, and with the music, and particularly with the with the Phil Collins montage in the air tonight, that nevertheless, despite my great familiarity with the whole process, I had to sit back and say, holy cow, this is hot. This is looking really cool. So yeah, there was some wonderful appreciation there for the process.
I'm going to ask you this last thing to wrap this up, which is when you start with that legal pad and with that ballpoint pen, and then as we sit here 40 years later and realize the significant impact Miami Vice had on television, as David Chase said, it was the first show that cared about how it looked. It was a show that impacted, as Matt Seitz wrote in Vulture, it's the show that changed the way television looked. You can't know that when you're sitting down with a piece of paper. When it became evident to you that Miami Vice was going to have such a remarkable and outsized impact on popular culture, on television, on film, on music, on radio, on entertainment, on fashion, on clothes, on cars, on watches, and all the other things that it touched, what was that like for you? And when did you realize that this was going to be something bigger than you could have ever probably realized with that ballpoint pen and that legal pad?
That sort of that realization came in several stages. First, when we had finished the whole post-production process, and I saw it all put together, I thought to myself, this could make a big splash. This could be a huge hit, and I think it should be. But you never know that as a writer, as a filmmaker, as a worker. You don't know that. You don't know how the audience is going to react. And we've all been on both sides of that equation, Sometimes we're pleasantly surprised by the audience's appreciation of something. Sometimes we're surprised and disappointed if they don't like it, but so when I first saw it, after the post-production, I first saw it all put together, all polished up and stuff like that. I thought, wow, this is really cool and could make a big splash. And then after the 2-hour pilot aired, and I heard from a lot of friends and colleagues, then I felt very confident that it was going to be a big, big hit. And of course, it wasn't a big, big hit, in the first few months. It wasn't until
Friday night.
The summer reruns,
right,
that then it kicked into the audience's imagination and engagement in the summer after we debuted.
Yeah, you got dumped on a Friday night against Dallas and Falcon Crest, and I mean that was the amazing thing about it, that it was the summer when it took off.
Yep.
Which I guess is the perfect time for a show about guys who are really sweaty in Miami to take off.
Yeah.
So, but it's one thing to have a hit. It's another thing to be a cultural and artistic phenomenon that touches whose tentacles are so far-reaching. And I think that's, I guess, what I'm talking about. Anybody can have a hit. Hits come and go all the time. Shows debut at number 1 and they're number 43 2 weeks later. But when you saw the impact it was having on Miami, the impact it was having on entertainment, the television shows were beginning to crop up that were trying to turn what you had created into a formula without any success, because it's one thing to just rip off an idea. It's another thing to understand what made it successful and impactful to begin with. I think that's the question I'd like to end with, which is, when did you know that it was bigger than just something that was going to be a nice run on NBC for a few years?
I knew that as soon as it came to my attention that, and by the way, pertinent to your question, there are certain factors that go into making a big hit that has resonance,
Right.
that has sociocultural resonance over the years. There's a number of factors that contribute to that are totally outside of one's control. The economy, the politics at the time,
Right.
the fashion or lack of it at the time, the musical landscape, the technological landscape. All those are not obviously under our control, and they all contribute. You could say that's part of the zeitgeist, right? So this, an often used term, but really applies in this case. In Miami Vice, really tapped into the spirit of the times, the zeitgeist. So to answer your question, Robert, I knew that it would have that resonance when it came to my attention that people were staying in on Friday nights. We were airing at one time at 9 p.m. and another time to slot 10 p.m. Regardless, people were staying in after they've been working hard all week, hopefully, and rather than going out like they usually would do on a Friday night, they'd stay in. Appointment TV, they'd stay in there. Sometimes they'd dress up in those kind of outfits and do whatever else that they saw the characters on screen doing. And they would watch the show and then they'd go out afterwards. And so that said a lot to me. Also, when Phil Collins' song In the Air Tonight was based on the show, went from being outside the Billboard Top 100, it was up in the stratosphere. It had come out a couple years before, the highest had gotten about 80, and it went from like the stratosphere to #1 in a couple days. The other thing I'd like to say is that the renaissance and rebirth of Miami is, you could argue this quite confidently, has been due solely to the launch of Miami Vice, but not immediately. It wasn't until Miami Vice we sold it to Europe, and it started airing in Europe, in France, in Italy, in Spain. And the fashion directors, the head of the top fashion magazines and the fashion brands, whether it be Gucci or Armani or Versace, or the top editor or the editors of the top fashion magazines, whether it be Paris Vogue or Elle magazine, whatever, when they saw the show on TV, finally around 1987, which was when it first started airing in Europe, and they saw that on their television sets in Paris and Milan, they were saying, why are we doing these photo shoots in Morocco where we can't even get good water, that models are getting dysentery, and there's no good film processing lab, they got to ship it up to Paris. Look at Miami, how beautiful it is. We made it look beautiful. Look how beautiful it is. Let's do all our fashion shoots there. So they started doing their fashion shoots, again, whether it be for Versace, Armani, you name it, right. Gucci, Prada, then did their fashion shots there. Those are in all the fashion magazines. The New York club and hotel guys saw that in the magazines. They said, holy cow, look how good Miami looks, and it's hip, and all these good looking models are here in front of on Collins Avenue, and let's open up a hotel in Miami. Let's open up a club. Let's open up a restaurant in Miami. 1988 is when it started. Right. So one could confidently argue, as I was saying, that the renaissance and rebirth of Miami is due nearly entirely to the launch of Miami Vice. And this manuscript is simply the manuscript that launched the TV series that launched the rebirth of Miami. So I think that's pretty cool.
That's a beautiful way to wrap it up, too.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you.
Tony, I got to tell you, I've spent 35 years interviewing people. I have a short list of people I've always wanted to talk to, and you, my friend, have always been on it.
God bless you, Robert. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.